causing youth violence. Video games are dangerous and should be banned. These are the most common statements made by the mass media, as the news claims that video games are dangerous because they cause addiction, incite violence, and expose people to its graphic content. This, therefore, makes the public think that video games should be banned. Although, in my research, I have found psychologists, lawyers, and professors who all use their knowledge to disprove of these so-called effects. In my speech, I will show you all the information I have found that prove that video games should neither be regulated or looked down upon. One of the most common reasons people think video games should be banned is because they are addicting. Although many professionals believe that they shouldn't be considered an addiction, even though 2019 the World Health Organization called it a disorder, many professionals disagree with this. An article from the American Psychological Association states, one area where there's lack of clarity is in regarding whether video game addiction represents a unique diagnostic entity. What this means is that it is difficult to diagnose video game addiction, as there aren't many consequences that give it to it. For example, you're not going to get an overdose from playing too much Fortnite, nor are you going to get a hangover from playing Minecraft. Video games don't have these kinds of consequences. Therefore, the professionals don't believe that it should be considered an addiction. Now, I mentioned in my previous speech that video game addiction is similar to gambling. Yes, it is true. Video games can cause loss sensitivity and dopamine, but Richard Wood, a research psychologist, highlights the key differences and consequences. Excessive video game players do not usually end up with huge debts, and it is unlikely a video game player will have their house repossessed because of video game playing debts. Yes, it is true the public does spend lots of money on video games, but not enough to sell their house just to play. Overall, from this information, it is difficult to determine whether playing too much video games is an addiction or a hobby. Now that we know that video game addiction isn't very valid, let's look at another mass hysteria. Many people blame video games for youth violence, although many experts do not agree. Sociologist Karen Sternheimer finds facts and statistics that debunk this statement. She uses Doom, a video game from the 90s, as an example. Now, as you can tell from the name Doom, it is obviously a violent game. It's a first-person shooter game with lots of gore and blood, a game that you wouldn't want to let children play. It was very popular in the 90s and most people knew what it was. She states in her article, "Do Video Games Kill?" In the 10 years following Doom's release, homicide arrest rates fell by 77% among juveniles, and school shootings remained extremely rare, which at the time was a common fear. As even during the 90s, students had less than 7 in 10 millionth chance of being killed at school. To add more to this, in another article, Cocoon from Crime, criminologists Kevin McCraffy and Ryan Proctor found in a study, contrary to hypothesis holding that violent video game behavior should be positively associated with violent crime, the number of video game stores within a county were negatively associated with robbery, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle, theft, and arson. As you can see in this graph, as the amount of video games rose, crime decreased. Although, I know what you're thinking, correlation does not explain causation. Yes, it is true, video games aren't necessarily decreasing the crime, but I think that we can confidently infer that they're not increasing them either from this graph. If you still believe that video games should be regulated, here is an example from a time in history where policies against video games have been turned down. In 2011, the governor of California tried to pass a law that prohibited the sales of violent video games. The video game industry fought back, and the case known as Brown versus the Entertainment Merchants Association, or the video game industry, was established. This case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and Daniel Orner, a law attorney, summarizes the results. The Supreme Court recognized that video games are protected by the First Amendment. The court emphasized that video games communicate ideas by telling interactive stories and allowing players to interact with the virtual world. Therefore, video games are protected just as any other form of freedom of speech. Therefore, as you can see, when you play video games, you can express yourself, and the court found that that is protected by the Constitution. Even though banning violent video games is impractical, the public still demands a way they can protect their children from violent content, and rightfully so, as in my audience analysis, half of you said that video game companies need to do more in order to protect children from the violent content they possess. That is true, although companies already do enough to protect children from the violent content they have. In the 90s, there was lots of controversy with violent video games. With games like Doom and Call of Duty and other violent games, the public was pretty skeptical about these games being released to the public. Therefore, in 1994, the video game industry, in response, created the Entertainment Software Ratings Board. What this system did is that it rated games based on the appropriateness they had. This system proved efficient, as in the article, the effectiveness of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board stated that in a study, 88% of parents said that the rating system was useful in choosing what games to let their children play, and as it should be. Here, you may recognize these from passing by the video game section at Walmart. There are three categories. There are three main categories are rated E, rated T, and rated M. Rated E is for content that is suitable for all ages. This is like your Super Mario, games that aren't really violent, no crude humor or anything. It's okay for anybody to play. Rated T is for content for ages 13 and up. This would be for your preteens. It might have a little bit of violence, not too much, some crude humor, and minimal blood. And rated M, which is the rating that most parents are concerned about, is content that is suitable for ages 17 and up. It may have intense violence, sexual content, strong language, drug references, and such. Therefore, this system lets us put our own rules in gaming rather than having the government tell us what games we can or can't play. Through statistical evidence and reasoning, we now know that video games do not cause major harm to society. Addiction affects very little to an individual. Violent video games don't incite real-world violence, making it unrealistic and pointless to ban them. As you heard before, video games are not correlated with crime, both not decreasing it or increasing it. Therefore, they shouldn't be regulated because of these supposedly stereotypes. And overall, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board provides enough information to protect children from violence. And it does, because it has 3 ratings, and most parents, when they look at these ratings, they'll see, oh, it's rated E, yeah, my kid can play that. Or it's rated T, yes, my kid is allowed to play this as well. And rated M, obviously we all know, is very inappropriate for children. Nobody would want their children to play this, and once the parent sees this rating, they'll see that it's not appropriate, because even on the back cover of the game, it says explicitly what things are inappropriate about them. Overall, policy should not be enacted to limit nor regulate video games. Therefore, now that we know all this information, we can now relax and game on. Thank you all for listening to my speech.